start out with just kind of recapping a couple things that I heard over today. Cybersecurity is hard. Regulation makes it tougher. The legal environment is almost becoming an adversary in itself. CISOs come out of the tech world. They don't know these areas of governance, risk, compliance, legal, regulatory, and yet they're having to rapidly ramp up in these skills to do their job. Okay. Everybody can read that, right? On the right-hand side. I've got 32 slides in that font. Go. All right. So we all have heard about the challenges. Good news, I'm going to tell you how to win. I'm going to tell you how to win not only in cybersecurity, but also in life. There's a direct correlation. Let's talk through it. The very first thing, we've already heard this many times already, that the pace of change in cybersecurity and technology is awe-inspiring, deafening, dizzying. Lots of words we can apply to it. But the very first thing that we all have to really embrace and get is that it's the slowest now in your lifetime that it ever will be. That's a little bit of an emotional hurdle we have to get over, because people don't like change. And cybersecurity and technology is only about change. This is a slide I like because it kind of illustrates a little bit about how folks in technology and security are kind of inventing it as we go. And yet we work in industries that have had, in some cases, hundreds of years opportunity to mature their discipline. Medici, banking, 1400s. They've had a couple of years to define their product. Financial services. Aviation, I was a CISO for United Airlines. Over 100 years, commercial airlines. They've had an opportunity to build up their discipline of how they do their business. And then CISOs come around not that long ago. I remember that. CIOs a little bit before that. I remember the conversation of, is a CIO even a chief? Should they be part of that chief hierarchy? Or should they just be at a director level? I remember when Gartner weighed in on the topic, and they originally came out and said no. Well, they were wrong on that and a couple other things, but that's fine. There's been a lot of false starts in cybersecurity and technology, and that's okay. There's a number of reasons why people struggle. And I put this slide out here. It might seem a little bit off to the side, but it's here to say it's okay. Again, we're not built to be able to handle the pace of change that is required in today's technologically dominant world. We're just not built for it. We have cognitive biases, we have social media distortion, we have mis and disinformation constantly slammed at us to elicit emotional responses, and a lot of us don't have the critical thinking skills built in to be able to decipher all of this mess which is thrown at us. The same things apply to cybersecurity. What's the result? Most cybersecurity programs fail. Now remember the first slide I put up there, I'm going to tell you how to win. I hope I've made you thoroughly depressed, because this is where we turn around and I get you more depressed. All right. A couple of the breaches we've seen in the last 5 years. Let's drill out a little bit. At the very bottom of the slide, you can't see, that says 2004 at the very bottom. The frequency, the pace, the impact have all been increasing. Clear evidence that what people are doing isn't working. If cybersecurity programs were working, we wouldn't see this. It's simple. We would see the opposite. We would see the reduction in breaches and frequency. We're not, okay? So what we're doing isn't working. Got it. We've talked about many of these things already in other panels. I won't get into them. A short list about brand reputation, about operational impacts, about costs, about trust. A couple of numbers up here. Terrific, you can read that. Upper left-hand corner, average time between an attacker getting in the front door to the defenders getting that attacker out, 287 days, 1 year almost. 287 days. This isn't changing. That number has roughly stayed the same over the past 7 years. Bottom right-hand corner, healthcare folks. Boy, I'm sorry. Past 11 years, top impacted industry in cost. I guess if you want to be first, you want to stay there? Maybe not. 10% increase in average total breach costs in just 1 year alone. Most industries to have double-digit growth is something to be admired. Not so much here. This is only increasing. So again, the assertion here is what we're doing isn't working. Our methodologies that we're applying to solve these problems that we've spoken detail about today, they don't work. Again, if they were, we wouldn't see the breaches that we're seeing. I assert the fundamental reason is because people are trying to solution this in a too complicated manner. Simplify, go back to the basics. We're not doing the basics well enough. So in times of radical change, managing the basics is everything. Right? Maybe you all have had somebody say to you, I can't trust you to do the big things if you can't do the small things. So I'm going to tell you how to do the small things, and then you're going to come out of here a winner. And you're all going to be cybersecurity experts. This is the CIS, the critical CIS controls, 18. Originally came out, SANS supported it a number of years ago. It was originally 20 different controls. Latest version, I think it was version 8, came out earlier this year, reduced it down to 18. These are the 18. I love the CIS 18. They give you a roadmap for how to implement security controls in an organization. If you want a 1, 2, 3 step of how to be successful, start here. Oh, wait, no, start here. You can call this the Arlan 5, or maybe not. All right, so I lay these out. So again, let me just pause. The CIS 18 not only gives you clear roadmap for what to do, but they also tell you how to do it. And that is a major difference between most regulatory and compliance frameworks, which just simply tell you what to do. They don't tell you how to do it. And in complex organizations, it's the how that matters. It's easy to say go do X, Y, and Z. It's difficult to map out the how. CIS does it for you. Run, don't walk, embrace the CIS 18, learn from it, and start with these 5. Now, why these 5? Because they work. They're effective. If you do these 5, you will stop most hacks. That's a pretty big statement. I stand by it. Let's talk about the one that is getting the most attention, the most headlines, ransomware. Scourge in the world. Why is it that bad guys keep on going after ransomware or using ransomware as a tool for hacking? Because it works. Keep doing what works. Why change the playbook if it works? As soon as the good guys start stopping the bad guys, then they'll stop doing what they're doing and they'll change their tactics. No reason for the bad guys to stop ransomware attacks. It's highly effective. It is a playbook which all defenders know. Why aren't they stopping it? If you did the 5, again, on the right-hand side, then you can stop ransomware. And in fact, if you just did the 3, the top 3, you'll stop ransomware. So ransomware typically gets into the environment, and it's not just one. Typically, it's a mix of things. But the main ways that bad guys get into environments through ransomware is through open RDP or communication channels. It is through vulnerabilities, known vulnerabilities. So again, the vendor says there's a weakness in this product. Here's a patch for free. Go apply it. But most organizations don't even patch. Right? If the bad guy knows you don't leave your front door unlocked when you go to Cancun, why would they break through the window? They're just going to walk through the front door. Organizations are leaving their front doors unlocked all the time. We heard through some of our legal and compliance and regulatory folks, they talked about due diligence, due care. I would assert, if you are not patching, you cannot claim you're doing due diligence and due care. These are the fundamentals. Finally, don't run as admin on the endpoint. So for the non-tech folks, this is, I don't know how to explain it. You're running at the highest level privilege. If a bad guy gets your credentials, acts as you, then you're toast. There's easy ways, well understood ways to configure your environment so your end users don't have to be admin. So do those top 3 things. I throw in the other 2 because these things are good to do about email protection and malware defenses. Of course, please do those as well. Top 5. But again, if you just did those 3 things, patch, don't have RDP to the internet, put a good password on it, have decent architecture, and then don't have admin on the endpoint, then you are going to stop the vast majority of ransomware. Last point on this. For those that may not be security experts or technical wizards, hackers rarely do voodoo. What do I mean by that? There's this concept of 0 days or voodoo where they come up with and by the way, you're going to see this in movies, right? They're sitting at the keyboard and they go, hey, I just discovered this new vulnerability. Nobody knows about it in the world, and I'm going to crack into this environment. It's really cool. There's typically lots of graphics and beautiful 20-some-odd-year-olds. That's the movies. In reality, that's not how it works. Reality is hackers don't have to work hard. Why? Because people aren't patching. The bad guys, they just look at the database of known vulnerabilities. They say, which one is going to fit here? They just take it right off the shelf. They don't have to work hard. Organizations make it easy. Patch. All right. So that's step 1. The Arlan 5, you're going to address a lot of your technical vulnerabilities in your environment by doing the top 5. And then after you feel you're well in place here, do the rest of the CIS 18. And by the way, when you do the CIS 18, then you are highly likely to already be compliant to the majority of the frameworks and regulatory controls out there. All right. The other is, this is a little bit more for when you're thinking about due diligence and due care for the CISO or security leaders out there or business leaders. How do you demonstrate that you have a program which is properly set up to protect the data, the organization, the shareholders, your customers? Right? Because if there's a breach, the lawyers are going to ask that question. They're not going to necessarily, they'll probably ask you about patching, but it's always about getting to the end of when you get in front of the judge is going to ask about due diligence and due care. That's what they're going for. So the way you demonstrate that is you systematize your program. right? Just as you have a framework to take a look at your technology stack, you have a framework to take a look to see how you're building your program. Let's talk very quickly about that. Great, I have 90 minutes left. Talked about the CIS, NIST CSF. Cybersecurity Framework by NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, out of, I think it's GAO. Wonderful framework. We'll talk a little bit about that in more detail. But really get it that cybersecurity is fundamentally a risk management discipline. So let's just set the basics here. To do cybersecurity well, you have to have a strong background in technology. However, it's risk management. NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors. This is an organization that provides training and documentation for corporate boards on how they should think about certain problems. They've published a document to guide boards of how to think about cybersecurity. They've laid out 5 principles, and I focus on these 3. I distill those 5 down to these 3. Is your overall cyber risk posture, current cyber risk posture aligned to your target risk posture? Any material risks? And are you spending the right amount of money? Those are very subjective questions. How do you measure that? I'll talk about that. And it's all around building a cybersecurity program. And simple math here, my son, he's 16. He's doing math. I have no idea how to help him out. So my math, I keep it real simple. I think you do the math in the parentheses first, if I remember right. Threats minus capabilities plus strategic drivers. Right, so you got bad things happening out there. You're going to set up a defense. The delta is a gap. Add in some strategic drivers. The output is what you're going to do. Eye chart. This deck is going to be available to everybody. I encourage you to take a read through it. The point on this slide here is that there are three main methodologies for trying to measure cybersecurity. You're going to have an ad hoc methodology, which you can shorten to say, I'm the CISO and because I said so. The second is a quantitative, and then the third is a qualitative approach. Pardon me, qualitative and then quantitative. What I've adopted is a hybrid between the qualitative and quantitative. An example of a quantitative model are things you may have heard of, Monte Carlo simulations or fair modeling. If you're not familiar with fair modeling and you're interested in this as a general topic, I strongly encourage you to take a look at fair modeling. There's some real interesting data that they're doing, some real interesting work that they're doing there to try to quantify the potential impact and likelihood of a breach occurring within an enterprise. And I made the mistake of not grabbing a water. Hey, Robert, would you be so kind? I appreciate. I take the hybrid approach, which I call a modified CSF. It is fundamentally using the CSF, but in a slightly modified way. This is the earlier math that I showed you, taking a look at threat assessments, capabilities, doing a threat assessment, doing a capabilities assessment, looking at your strategic drivers, putting that into a machine so that your output directs you to the actions you need to take to improve your cybersecurity program. Again, a lot of words. Thank you very much, sir. Is that vodka? God bless you. Thank you. Couple more minutes. Yeah, he knows me. I wasn't sure where to go with that one. Robert and I have known each other for many years. So let's move on. Let's talk about the modified CSF. The CSF comes at the top level, 5 functions: identify, protect, defend, respond, recover. Underneath that, you have 23 categories and 108 subcategories. Pretty standard format for most frameworks. And they're all mapped to all of the major control frameworks that we all love and learn and that we have to be compliant to based upon the business we work in. The key about this, though, is how it's structured makes it accessible to non-technical individuals. If you start talking about patch management or identity or vulnerability management or perimeter or incident response, your CEO, COO is not really going to understand what those things mean. If you start talking about how we're identifying threats, protecting against threats, responding to threats, there's greater accessibility there. And that's one of the key reasons why I'm a backer of NIST CSF and why I've chosen to use that as our primary model. Now, there's a lot going on in this slide. What I wanted to show you very easily here, on the very top, the function, the identify, this is one of the 5. On the far left, you've got a category there. You've got asset management. You've got multiple subcategories in that asset management. The very top one talks about physical devices being inventoried. There's other subcategories down there, and each subcategory is mapped to a control reference. So maybe your ISO, maybe your COBIT, maybe your NIST 853 because you're government. But there's so much overlap. There's probably about 80% overlap in all frameworks. So you get compliant to one, then you're about 80% there for the other majors. Now, that's going to be more or less true, but directionally it's correct. Now, the reason why that is because, again, patch management is a good idea. You're going to find it in every framework. Go do it. All right? But I wanted to show you just very quickly how it's broken out. We're not doing the tutorial on what the CSF is, but I wanted to give you that visual of what that looks like. What I do, however, want to focus on is what this looks like, this process. How to systematize looking at measuring risk. A very subjective topic. How do you create traceable and transparent methodology where the output of that machine is consistent and defendable? Not because I said so. And what you do is you go through this wheel where you start with, you're looking at, you're going through this process, you're answering these questions in these 108 subcategories, and the output is a certain score, and there's guidance on how to do that score. And then you're going to set some weights for each subcategory. Why do you need weights? Well, if you're in manufacturing, some of these controls, like around SCADA systems, is going to be a little bit more important than if you're a complete online SaaS environment. Right? If your whole business is in the cloud, you don't have any SCADA. That control doesn't make much importance to you. So you have to have the opportunity to say that one's not important or exclude it all from the calculation set. After you have where you are, then you're going to make a couple determinations. Where do you want to be? Where do I want to be in 3 years or in 18 months? The difference is just a gap. And that gap gets filled with projects. Now, one of the things that you're going to hear from a lot of people in my field, CISO, is that projects often get cut. It's one of the major complaints. I told the boss we needed to do this, but then he or she cut it, and then we were breached. It's not my fault. I assert, yes, it is your fault, CISO. It's not the CFO, it's not the COO, it's the CISO's fault. They didn't create a model or deliver that in a language which is understandable to that COO or CFO. They talked talk, or they talked tech. They didn't talk business. They didn't talk risk. Don't make them learn TCP/IP and what layer 8 means, or what an ID10T error is. Your job, if you want that C title, is to be able to talk to them and act like a chief. Talk risk. Don't talk talk. Don't talk tech. Now, this is another illustration. Again, we're not getting deep into the woods on a tutorial of how to do this. I'm happy to. Arlan McMillan at Proton. protonmail.com. Email me. It's on the deck. But this gives you a visual of how you're going to be taking into your risk posture of your organization, taking it out of the qualitative, the subjective, and into a quantitative metric. Another example, you'll see we've been focusing on the identify function, and you'll see the 7 different categories there. And you'll see in 1 year, the score is on the far left-hand side in that first black column, and then the next one is the following assessment, and you'll see what the target there, and then how you are against target. Well, that fourth one down is red. That's bad. I can't even read what that is, but I see it's red, so that's got to be bad. And guess what? That's what your executive leadership does as well. That drives change within an organization. Not talking about incident counts. Not talking about, ARP evasion techniques. They're real. They work. Now, this is another visual. When I go in front of boards, and by the way, I've used this at boards at Fortune 50 and Fortune 100 companies to strong effect. This is the visual I typically give. And I typically have like 3 pages, 5 pages at most. This is 1 page, and it's all 5 functions. And I'll let you read it. It basically says where we were, where are we, and where do we want to go. And it talks about risk. Give a little bit of detail in the appendix, if they want to go there, about what it means for each one of these functions. The key here is changing the language. Doing the basics, get your hygiene down. Because again, at least from a technical level, there are easy wins. There are, I promise you. There are easy wins. This is a battle that can be won. Approach it, again, in the language of risk. The language of risk is a language of executives. Don't make them learn technology. They will tone you out. Very importantly, because I said so isn't enough, that is that ad hoc model that a lot of CISOs build their program off of. And you can win a couple battles. You're not going to win the war. Not with because I said so. And very importantly, define current to target to drive your security program and find gaps. All right, now we're all winners. Got a few minutes. I don't want to take anybody away from the bar cart, though. What can I answer for you? Now, I planted the audience, by the way, with a couple questions because, Lord, it's really scary when you're up here and you don't have questions. Yes, sir.
Not a plant. Real question. What are your thoughts on open source software? Good, bad, in between?
Indifferent. It's less about what it is and more about how you're doing it. So, for example, open source, GitHub is a wonderful example. People love to write code that calls out to Git. Git is an online repository in the cloud. code is often, some coders write their code to call libraries in the cloud. Terrible idea. GitHub is wonderful, not a problem. Open source is not a problem. It's wonderful. It's how you do it, right? I like the idea of having code being able to be reviewed by lots of people. I like lots of eyes on a problem. I don't like how it's implemented in a lot of ways. I think a lot of shortcuts are being taken, which isn't strong or mature, in my opinion, or reflective of the risks that are being taken. Any follow-on to that? Oh, no, he's got the next follow-on. Oh, yeah, no, no, we get into this argument all the time. Go.
I love free open source software to teach you what you don't know about what you don't know.
That's great.
Taking a look at a new technology in a new space, most of the time a POC just teaches you that you don't know jack about that particular technology. So using free open source as an experiment in the environment is a great way to learn what you need.
So for those that may not have heard, the response was there's a lot of commercial systems out there that you're not aware of either. Yes, please.
And if the open source follows somewhat the cathedral bizarre philosophy of a lot of eyeballs potentially make it better, then, as Arlan said, you know, and I think you said use it to learn, but it doesn't mean that open source is necessarily bad.
No, it just is. It's not good or bad. It's in the implementation. One argue, yes, sir.
You needed a process for onboarding open source.
This is where, this is the how, right? The process and the management of it. Again, it's not bad. It's how you're managing it. Yes, sir. I love it. I've kicked the tiger. Yes, sir.
So when you go to the board for funding, right, how do you quantify this? Because, I mean, that's an important component.
Yeah.
Where you're spending money wisely.
Yeah. So it's using this methodology. And again, one of the things that I didn't really get into because I didn't want to try to make this I do many hour sessions on this method. And there's obviously more under the hood. But essentially what you're doing is you're using this established, known, good framework, which is widely accepted and respected in the industry. And I run a series of interviews with subject matter experts and people within the organization where I run them through the scoring process. And again, there's a method to do this scoring. It's essentially 1 through 100, but you don't have 100 choices. You have essentially 5 choices. And what you have is a lot of different viewpoints on this subcategory. And again, subcategories is 108, and they're just questions. So, do you do this? Whatever this is. And then you get all these different viewpoints. And then the aggregate, you can do math, you can do an average. I don't always do an average. I have a little bit more sophisticated methodology where I'll higher rank subject matter experts more than that person that says, shucks, I don't know. You're forcing me to answer this, but I don't know. Okay, great. Yes, I'm going to force you to answer, but I'll downgrade your answer. I'll upgrade the SME's. Right, so there's a bunch of things under the hood. But essentially, 108, ask a bunch of people the same question on the 108. The output is a score, and then I take it. And I don't take that score. Why? Because I'm the expert. I'm the CISO. My board entrusts that I am protecting the organization. So I apply my lens. I'm going to take all the good wisdom of all of these individuals within the team and that are going to greatly influence my answer, but then I'm going to answer it. It's my assessment. And then from there, that's the current state. The target state becomes a little interesting, right? That's where, yes, sir, I'll get to you in a second. Then the target state is much more difficult. This is a lot of conversation with business leaders. This is not some SME conversation to say, what do you think we should be doing? But it's a risk-based conversation. Let me give you an example, a strategic driver. threats minus capabilities plus strategic drivers. Maybe the organization has a growth by acquisition strategy. If your organization has a growth by acquisition strategy, that means that the security systems that you set up have to be highly agile, work in multiple regulatory regimes, and be able to be deployed very quickly. That's different than an organic growth strategy, right? So that's going to influence what your target score is. But again, once you have those set up, and this isn't a one and done thing, once you get into it, people are going to start getting into it a little bit. And they're like, oh, wait a second, maybe that should be a little bit different. And that's fine. That's actually better than fine. That's great. That's called an adult conversation. That's called risk management. And there's never one right answer. It's what's the appetite of the organization. Does that answer your question? Great, thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I just,
Hi.
had a question.
Yes, please. I'm nervous. You're making me nervous already.
Yeah, because I have a different perspective.
Good. Please share.
Just got into this cybersecurity business in 2017. I was a floor trader on the board,
Yeah, sure.
all right? So I understand risk.
Yeah.
We own an emphasis. What I found out dealing with CFOs and CEOs, usually the conversation stops.
100% agree.
They have no idea. It's the only rule.
Don't talk talk. Don't talk tech. Yes.
If you look at them and say, they don't even know how to ask you what kind of firewall.
No. Absolutely not.
My point is, and I'm just making a comment,
Yeah, please.
you know, there's two times you can communicate with them. One, in the middle of a breach, then they'll listen to everything you have to say. But you're right, you have to dumb it down, or you have to, I don't want to say dumb it down, you have to put it to a point where they understand risk, and if they're willing to accept it.
We are in radical agreement. You just said my whole talk. You're brilliant. Yeah, no, but that's a great point, because as a trader, you're trained in risk. Sure, there are financial instruments that you have to know and how to manage, but it's a risk-based profession, right? I cut my teeth in banking, never trading, never high pressure like that. But I remember, working with the bankers there, and I remember one conversation where I went to my leadership to do this, and I said, oh my God, the risk, and they stopped me, and she said to me, she's like, that's all we do is managing risk. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I got that. That's all we do is manage risk. You're not scaring me. Give me more detail. It's a tough conversation. It really is. 100%. I love having conversations with CFOs and COOs. I seek them out. The way I set up my organization is I work with those folks. In the city, I used to be the CISO for the city of Chicago. You had a commissioner that worked with the mayor's office, and you had the first deputy or managing deputy that managed the organization. I have set up the same model in my organizations. I work with my COO, CFO, CEO. I work with that group, and then my team, then I have a couple directors that manage the team for the most part. Because my job is to work with the executives and make sure they understand risk and I understand their appetite. That's my job. I also have to talk tech. I was an engineer. I like talking tech.
You have to work with Ron.
He yelled at me a couple times. Small story, I never swore until I got into the city, and it took me about 3 years to break the habit after leaving. Yeah, decades for you, right? All right, I want to be respectful of time, but I love the conversation. Any last minute question? Comment? All right. So I'm giving it back to you. My last comment, come on up here. My last comment is thank you. This is something I'm really passionate about. It's something that I've been evangelizing, this methodology, this approach, for over a decade. I've seen it work. Love to talk to anyone, everyone in more detail, as much detail as you'd like to go. So thank you.